Thanks so much, Emma, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those that don't know, I'll start off telling you a little bit about the Mother's Day Classic. The Mother's Day Classic is Australia's largest fun run and walk for breast cancer research. Having started from very humble beginnings back in 1998, it has grown quite literally from a walk in the park. My children talk about literally all the time, but this quite literally is a walk in the park, into this extraordinary, iconic national fun run and walk that happens on Mother's Day in up to, this year it'll be 75 locations all around Australia. This event supports breast cancer research, and we'll be hearing more about that a little later on, but it is supporting the 1 in 7 women and 1 in 600 men. We do acknowledge, obviously, that men are impacted by breast cancer as well. They'll be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. Thank you, Charter Hall, for hosting this morning tea this morning. The Mother's Day Classic is strongly supported by the tenants of Wesley Place here. Not only is our small team located over in 150 Lonsdale Street, but we also have a number of the tenants right across Wesley Place taking part. Australian Super has been one of our partners for the last 11 years. They have a team of over 100 taking part on Sunday. We also have Telstra Super, CBUS, AIST, Women in Super, all registering teams for the Mother's Day Classic. So it is wonderful to have you all here. Also, on Thursday, there will be some treats and gifts available in both 130 and 150 Lonsdale to celebrate Mother's Day. And again, thank you to Charter Hall and Wesley Place for hosting that. As I mentioned, the funds from the National Breast Cancer Foundation, the funds from the Mother's Day Classic are donated to the National Breast Cancer Foundation to fund life-changing research. And since 1994, when the National Breast Cancer Foundation began, the 5-year survival rate at that stage was at 76%. Today, through research, that 5-year survival rate is now up to 92%, but there is still more to be done. We're very lucky today to be joined by 2 inspirational speakers. Firstly, I'll introduce you to Louise Davidson AM. Louise is the co-founder of the Mother's Day Classic and former chair of the Mother's Day Classic. She's held various positions in the Mother's Day Classic over the last 25 years and is currently a director on our board. In 2015, Louise was named a Victorian Local Hero with the Australian of the Year Awards for her work with the Mother's Day Classic. And in 2019, she was made a member of the Order of Australia. She also has more than 20 years' experience in financial services and superannuation industry. She's currently the CEO of the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors and a director on the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. So thank you for joining us, Louise. We also are joined by Dr. Tamara Jones, who's a postdoctoral research fellow with the University of Melbourne and an affiliate of the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. As an exercise physiologist, her work looks at the role of physical activity and exercise for people with cancer, and looking at how increasing physical activity levels and participating in structured exercise can improve the health outcomes and quality of life for people with cancer. One of the projects that she's working on has been funded through the National Breast Cancer Foundation, and with funds raised through the Mother's Day Classic. So we'll be hearing more about that research today. Just before we jump into that, I'm going to give you a quick sense of the last 25 years. So that's going to get to some questions. Thank you. So Louise, we'll start off with the first question for you. 25 years ago, you, along with your very dear friend who's shown up on the screen here, Mavis Robertson, had no experience in running fun run or walk, were working in the superannuation industry, and you thought, I suspect, how hard can it be, and thought you might start the Mother's Day Classic. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you and Mavis to do that?
Yes, and you're completely right, Sarah. We didn't have any idea of what was involved. So my mum had died about 3 or 4 years before of breast cancer when she was only 52. So I was acutely aware of the toll that breast cancer was taking on women in the community and also, of course, on their families. So, me at the age of 27 left without my mum. And I had nursed my mum through her breast cancer as well. So I'd seen really close up, the impact that the disease had on someone. And Mavis knew that this was the case, and she was on a study tour to the US at the time, and she got on a bus, and the bus was full of women wearing medallions and placards saying that they were doing something in memory of someone. And so she asked the woman who sat next to her what it was about, and it was an event raising money for breast cancer research. So of course Mavis came back to Australia and said to me, well, you're very, this is a big interest to you, so how about you do something about it? So I think it was actually a direction from Mavis. and so it wasn't all just Mavis and I, of course. So we were really lucky to be in an environment where there was an organisation in our industry called Women in Super, which jumped right in and also wanted to be involved. And we set up committees in Melbourne and Sydney to start organising an event that would raise money for breast cancer research and would also involve, coming together as a community. None of us had ever been to a fun run before. And in fact, in those days, there was, like now there are lots and lots of cause-related events. That was not the case in those days. And when someone explained to me that we actually had to measure the course so that it was accurate, I was like, oh, okay, this is a little bit technical for me. And that first year, we had about 1,800 people join us in Melbourne for the first event. And I remember standing there watching all of these people doing their warm-up aerobics and thinking that my mum would have been so proud of what we'd achieved. Of course, in years to come, 1,800 people looked like a tiny number, but it was a good start.
Well, that's right. Look, here we are, 26 years on, $41.5 million donated to breast cancer research. 1.5 million people have taken part in this event. There's, as I said, 75 locations happening this Mother's Day, this coming Sunday, around Australia annually. Why do you think, Louise, it's actually been so successful? Because you don't see events with that sort of longevity and just, going from strength to strength.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's quite special about the Mother's Day Classic, well, sadly, part of the reason for its success is that so many people are impacted by breast cancer. So 1 in 7 women will develop breast cancer in their lives. And so we all know someone who has had breast cancer, or we are someone who has had breast cancer. So that's one of the reasons. But I think the other thing that's important about the event was that we started it not as a running event, but as a community event that had some running attached to it. And so it was always aimed at being a walk in the park, as you call it, Zara. And so one of the things it's done, in addition to the fundraising, it's done 2 important things. Firstly, it's created a community for people who, on Mother's Day, would have had a pretty miserable day because either their mum is too sick to celebrate or maybe they've lost their mum. Certainly that was part of my motivation. And the second thing it's done, so it's created this community and given people somewhere to be and a purpose for Mother's Day on what might otherwise be not a good day for them. But the other thing I think it's done is it's raised a lot of awareness. And of course now, there is a much higher level of awareness about breast cancer. But I've had quite a large number of people over the years come to me and say, my wife and I did the Mother's Day Classic, or I did the Mother's Day Classic, or my mum did the Mother's Day Classic, and thought about that lump that she had in her breast as a consequence of being confronted with what was going on at the Mother's Day Classic, got it checked subsequently, and got breast cancer diagnosed early enough, but they might not have had that early diagnosis had they not done the Mother's Day Classic.
Absolutely. Now, Tamara, I'll come across and ask you a few questions now. But you, along with Associate Professor Camille Short, have been part of a research project that's been funded by the National Breast Cancer Foundation with the funds that have been raised through the Mother's Day Classic. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yes, of course. So the project that we're working on is called the Remote Trial, and the aim of Remote is to remotely deliver exercise, hence the name, to women who have received breast cancer treatment and who are at a higher risk of developing some late cardiovascular effects. and trying to help them improve their heart health through physical activity and exercise. And I think you mentioned in the last couple of decades there's been a huge increase in the survival following breast cancer as well as treatments. So now a lot more funding is going into helping women survive well and recover following their breast cancer treatment. So I think that's great that we're now helping people move forwards after their treatment. So what led us to developing the remote trial was that we noticed that in the exercise and cancer research field, most of the interventions that people were trying to deliver were based at a university or a hospital clinic, where participants had to come in so that exercise professionals could deliver the exercise face to face. And the feedback we were receiving from that was a huge commitment. They had to travel to wherever the clinic was, they had to coordinate with the availability of research staff, and then they just had life commitments, so work, kids, as well as treatment or follow-up appointments as well. So going to a university or hospital again was just too many appointments. So the remote trial is based on a smartphone exercise app. So what the women can do is wear a heart rate monitor and then record their exercise sessions using the app. And then that is transmitted in real time to a web page where an exercise professional can monitor them and then send them direct messages as they're exercising. So with that app, as long as they've got the phone with them, they can exercise in their home, they can exercise around their home. They don't have to travel anywhere, but they're still getting that real-time exercise support.
And some of the early results is showing it is a lot easier than for them to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't finished the trial yet, so the fitness and the health outcomes we haven't quite gotten to yet, but I think the big take-home message that I'm hearing so far is that this is what they wanted. It's accessible, it makes it flexible and easy for them to access that support. And I think a lot of people are interested in hearing about exercise, and particularly for this trial, the importance that it can have for heart health. But just being able to access that information or access the support was a big barrier. So being able to do it from their home at a time that's workable for them, in a setting that's easy for them, that's made a real difference.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know that that's one thing with the National Breast Cancer Foundation when they look at, they obviously receive more requests for funding than they're able to fund projects, but in addition to having scientific review, they also have a customer review process to say, where should we be funding research? What is going to make a difference in terms of improving that quality of life? So it's fantastic to see that matching of, how do we make sure that the research is relevant and is really addressing.
Definitely, and I think they get that feedback in choosing where the funding goes, and then they're also involved in the design as well. So we've had a few remarkable women who've been able to contribute to developing this, and I think that's made a real difference.
Now, Wesley, the project you've talked about is focused on the importance of exercise in improving heart health for breast cancer survivors. But can you talk a little bit more generally, because I know some of your work has looked at the importance of exercise in breast cancer and indeed all cancer in prevention?
Yes, so for prevention, I think a lot of people are aware that not just for cancer or breast cancer, but for a lot of chronic conditions, exercise plays a huge role in preventing developing those conditions or reducing your risk of developing those conditions. The exercise and cancer field is a little newer compared to some of the other chronic health fields, but I think just last year a new review was released where there was strong evidence that exercise and physical activity could reduce the risk of developing 7 different cancer types, breast cancer among them. But as more research is coming out every year, every time they do a review like that, they're finding more associations with high levels of activity preventing the risk of developing some cancers. But I think something that is important to note with that, it's a big misconception whether you're exercising before a cancer diagnosis or following, is the amount of exercise that you actually have to do. So I think a lot of people are quite overwhelmed because they think they have to be working really hard, they have to be pushing themselves to the limit to be able to experience any of those benefits, but that's actually not the case. So the guidelines recommend about 150 minutes a week, which is still a fair amount of time for particularly busy people to take out of their week. But that is at a moderate intensity. So I think that's why you mentioned this walk and building that community. Moderate intensity means that you should actually still be able to speak to the person next to you. So you don't need to be completely breathless. If you're walking along with a friend, you should still be able to have a conversation, have a gossip. So it can still be a really enjoyable activity. It's just finding a way to make it enjoyable and knowing that you don't have to push yourself to the limit.
Fantastic. And Louise, just staying with that sort of topic of research, and I know that you and Mavis were adamant that the funds and women's would go to research because it is research that leaves that legacy. The gift, I guess we always say that those that donate and participate today are giving to the next generation. You've talked about your mother Kay, far too young, and you nursed your mother throughout her breast cancer, and then years later diagnosed with breast cancer yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw in terms of research and the difference between the experience you had with your mother Kay and then your own experience?
Yeah, so the first thing to say is that I was really affronted to be diagnosed with breast cancer myself, because having done all this work on the Mother's Day Classic, I felt I should have had immunity. However, that wasn't the case, and I guess I was lucky because of my mum's history. I was having regular surveillance, and I would recommend to everybody to make sure that you are having regularly making sure that you look at your own breasts and make sure that there's not big changes, and if they are, get them checked out. And once you get to, I can't remember what age it is, I think over 50, start having your regular mammograms, because early detection makes the world of difference. And I was lucky that my breast cancer was detected early, but part of the reason for that, not just my regular surveillance, but that everything had changed because of the research that had taken place since my mum had had breast cancer. And so the diagnostics were much more sophisticated. The lump in my breast was quite deep and also quite small, and may not have been picked up years earlier if not for the improvements in ultrasound and mammography technique. The other thing that I found was that the treatment plan for people with breast cancer had changed quite dramatically. And one of the things that I had been partly funded by the National Breast Cancer Foundation was this idea of a sentinel lymph node. So in the old days, like when my mum had breast cancer, they removed the lump, and they also took out all the lymph nodes from under your arm, and because they wanted to see whether there was cancer in any of those lymph nodes. Now, having all the lymph nodes under your arm taken out, they're there for a purpose, and having them taken out leads to really a lot of discomfort for women often, and a lot of swelling in the arm, difficulty moving. And so the research that was funded by National Breast Cancer Foundation meant that you could have a small injection of dye into your nipple. Now that's not a nice thing to think about, so don't visualise it too much, it's pretty painful. And that dye then shows them which is the lymph node that your breast drains to, and that's the lymph node they then take in surgery to see if there's any cancer in that lymph node, instead of taking all the lymph nodes. So I was the beneficiary of that. It sounds like a small thing, but it's a massive thing. And I just thought, I never really started this thinking I would be the beneficiary, but here I am.
It's amazing, and we do, that is the thing with the research. I love hearing about the intricacies of the research. So the Mother's Day Classic has funded 81 research projects through that 25 years, and all of them have different ways of, not obviously just, it's all about saving lives, but improving that quality of life, ways that we can better detect, better treat, but improve the quality of life through the treatment, which is just fantastic. Tamara, back to you again, just on the your work as an exercise physiologist. We all would love, particularly on these windy, cold, wet mornings, to have that motivation to get up. I know your work sort of focuses as well on that motivation aspect. Is there a magic motivator? I know you've talked about doing it while we can chat and gossip. Anything else, any other magic we need to get us out there?
I wish there was one thing that I could tell everyone that would motivate everyone to exercise, even for myself, particularly on mornings like this. Unfortunately, there isn't. We are all so different and have different priorities and likes and dislikes and preferences, particularly when it comes to exercise. But if I had to give one tip, I think this has come out in our research, but is also something that has worked for me personally, is to just find something positive, something that is personally important to you, or something that you value, and use that as a reason to exercise. So I think looking at it that way in comparison to, I think a lot of us often feel guilty or we're motivated by some more negative reasons because we don't, or maybe we just feel a bit guilty watching other people and how much they do. So I think trying not to be motivated by anything negative or putting yourself down if you don't think you've done the perfect exercise session, or if you sleep in on a cold, wet morning, which is exactly what I did this morning. You don't need to feel guilty about that. It doesn't mean that you've messed up your perfect exercise week. So rather than beating yourself up about that, just think about what is valuable to you, and I think that will help get you started, but particularly in the longer term, it will just help with the consistency rather than, getting up every morning for a week. If you get up 3 or 4 days out of the week, but you do that every single week because you know what's important to you and you know why you're exercising, then I think that's probably the biggest tip that I can give everyone.
Louise, let's find out about your Mother's Day. You really haven't had a sleep in on Mother's Day for 26 years, I guess. Tell us a bit about what your Mother's Day looks like.
When my daughters were little, they're now in their early 20s, but when they were little, they used to write me cards that said Happy Mother's Day Classic, because that's what they Yes, my Mother's Day does not involve any sleep-in, and I wouldn't have it any other way. There's nothing better for breakfast on Mother's Day morning than an egg and bacon roll at the Mother's Day Classic.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you both for joining us today. Any last insights you want to share for today? Lasting things that you want to message for Mother's Day?
I don't think I can top the community that Louise mentioned before. I think just in every aspect of life, that's super important. So I think just get out there, have a chat, have a walk. It's the best way to spend the day.
I just encourage everyone to join us if you can, and if you can't, maybe plan for next year. Support someone with a donation in your immediate circle. I'm sure you all know someone who's raising money for the Mother's Day Classic, and if you don't, my page is up there.
No better day today is the Me Bank Matched Giving Day. So Me Bank kindly matching all donations up to $20,000 today. So jump online. You can still donate tomorrow, but spring into action and donate. And as Louise said, there truly is no better way to start your Mother's Day. The event is, I feel almost a little bit of a fraud until last year, because I started just before COVID hit, and then we had the virtual event, we had the local event, and it really wasn't until last year that I stood at that start line looking at that sea of pink as far as your eye can see here in Melbourne, and then this beautiful mingling of grief with sorrow, but with joy and hope and fun. And it's really funny to think that you can put both fun and grief into the one combination of an event, but it is a beautiful event. It's a great way to start your day with purpose, with community. And as Louise said, if you're not part of it this year, do think about joining us another year or donating, because it's something pretty special that Louise and Mavis and the entire Women in Super network started 25 years ago, and that we're continuing today. Thank you all for coming along. I know there's still plenty of food, so please grab something after this, and thanks for joining us.